It's good to see everyone out tonight. I know I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate you and being willing to come back and worship some more with us again tonight. What we're going to be talking about, and I encourage you to open up your Bibles to Genesis, not to Ecclesiastes. I don't want you to turn there and then I'm having to turn back, but actually to Genesis chapter 47. We're going to be talking tonight about a very difficult subject to tackle because it involves one of the two things that we don't like talking about. And I feel like when it comes to sin and talking about the problems in the world, the two things that we don't like to talk about is sexual morality and the problems that we have with money. But what is and hence destroying the world? Sexual immorality and money. Those are the two things that are probably like our biggest problem in society that you can visibly see. So this is something we're going to want to tackle tonight. When I was little, maybe 8 or 7 years old, I wanted to buy a PlayStation 1. It was a video game console. It had come out several years before, but my cousin had brought one over and played it with me, and I wanted one too. So I asked my dad, if I could have one. Can I go buy me a PlayStation 1? We didn't call it PlayStation 1, it was just a PlayStation then. Can you go buy me a PlayStation? And Dad said no. He said, if you want to get it, you're going to have to pay for it. And this was kind of my first lesson ever when it had to do with something to do with money. So it was $130. I've not forgotten how much it was. It was $130, which to a 7-year-old, that's a massive amount of money. So what I did is I just did odd jobs. And I probably got a lot of money for things that weren't worth the value of the work that I did. But I did stuff for my neighbors and for my relatives, rake leaves, that sort of thing. And I came up with $100. So for a 7-year-old, I'd hit this benchmark. I have $100. Now, I'm only $30 away from what I want. This is that PlayStation. So I go up and ask Dad, could you forward me this $30? So I could go ahead and buy this PlayStation now. Dad told me no. He said that wasn't part of the deal. I would have to fill up the whole $130. So naturally what I do is I get on my bicycle and I go a little less than a mile down the road to my grandparents' house. Of course, you can picture a 7-year-old with the card stuck in his bicycle, so it sounds like a motorcycle. And I'm trucking down the sidewalk. And I get up and I go ask my granddad, Granddad, I'm going to need about $30. And it just kind of dawned on me that I bet Dad had called him and told me not to loan me the money. Because Granddad wouldn't do it either. But as the more I tried to talk and cut this deal with my grandfather, we decided we came up with a deal. He would forward me the $30 if I cleaned out his storage building. So he's going to go ahead and pay me the $30 now so I can go ahead and buy what I want. But I am going to have to clean his storage building. That was the deal. That's what I was going to borrow. That's how I was going to pay him back. But as the summer went on, I decided to go over to Granddad's house, but I would rather, just go swimming at their house or maybe just do something else. No, Granddad, I'm not here to clean the storage building. I just came over for a Coke. And I grabbed one and go back to the house. So when I was 17 years old, I drove my truck down there and I went and cleaned out that storage building. It took a very long time. But that was my first, and my grandfather still hasn't let me forget it. And he still reminds me. Maybe he's listening tonight, and maybe he'll call me tonight and ask me, wait, did you actually do it? But that's just my first experience with borrowing money, having to deal with that sort of situation. Now, the idea of borrowing money, it starts when we're little like that, and we learn the concept, but it's something that is how we exist through life. You have to borrow money to get started. You have to borrow something so you can turn and make a profit and to continue going. Now, what's great about this thing is that God did not abandon us in this process. He didn't just say, okay, I know you have an economy. I know you have things that you need. I know you have things that you need to buy, things you want to buy. He didn't just abandon us and say, guess what? You just have to figure it out. But actually, he spent time in his word. The few books that he was going to give us to reveal himself, he spent time to make sure his people knew how to control their money. So that's what we're going to look at tonight. To kind of give you an idea and kind of put you in a setting, something a little bit more mature than a 7-year-old having to borrow $30 from his granddad. But of how much debt we is in a country. And usually that's what we want to talk about is the government debt. Well, one of the easiest explanations for me to understand why the government is so much debt is because we run the government the same way we run our households. If you have individuals that are living in a country full of debt, you would make sense why the government would be in debt as well. And this is kind of how much debt, and if you can't see it, it doesn't matter. The darker the blue the state, the more debt the individual is. This is the average debt of the individual population, the debt of us. Now, in Alabama, we're actually pretty good. Here it says that we're only in $38,000 worth of debt as state average. But this is just how much debt you're in. The next chart is a lot worse. This is the percentage of debt we are in that has ended up in debt collectors. This is basically when you don't pay your debt, so you don't pay what you owe, and they have to send you to a debt collection agency. Your name gets put in usually after 180 days of not paying your bill. Now the darker blue, look at Alabama. We're terrible at it. So yes, we're not as in much debt by dollar as the other states are, but us as individual people living in Alabama, we are worse at actually paying back our debts on time. What's expected out of us. So it is a big problem. If you did care that the president came to Birmingham a couple of weeks ago, one thing he said in his little bitty speech, I only listened to this one part, but he said there were more payday places in Alabama than they were McDonald's. Apparently that's something that he wanted to talk about. But it's a true statement. This is something that we're bad at, is the debt we are in. In Genesis, we have an example, and we see that credit in itself is not the enemy. The borrowing process, borrowing money to turn and make a profit and to pay back an individual is not the enemy in itself. Some people live in the situation where they don't ever have to have any debt. That they get to live life and be debt-free, and if you can, that's great. But that usually means is that someone helped them get started. Yes, they have a job, but maybe somebody provided them with a car free to go to that job, provided them with a house free so they can live in a place so that they can work, so they get to be debt-free. Now, a lot of us, though, aren't in that situation. We did have to work ourselves to get to the places we are now, which usually means that we had to borrow money. We had to borrow something so we could pay back later. You maybe have heard the phrase, you have to spend money to make money. And that's true in a lot of cases. But what I really want to apply is you have to start with something. You have to start with something. If you hear you get a job in Atlanta and you don't have a car to get there, what are you going to have to do? You're probably going to have to borrow money so you can afford a car to go get to your job so you can make money to pay that car off. That's the way, basically, how credit works. And I understand a lot of people here working money. You're looking at Andrew going, Andrew, you're making it so simple. Yeah, that's the only way I can understand it. But this is kind of my perspective on it. Now, what's so great about this is we see this happening in the Bible a whole lot. Somebody borrowing something so they can pay it back later. We see this in Genesis 47. Now, Pharaoh had the dream that there was going to be 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of famine. Joseph is called from prison to interpret this dream, and God does that for Joseph. And what it is Pharaoh, the famine is coming. What you need to do is you need to store up grain in the 7 years of plenty so you can survive the 7 years of famine. And a lot of people are saved because Joseph takes in charge of this and makes sure that this warehouses are built to store up the grain for the famine. So the Egyptians first start paying with their money. They start paying with what they had in money-wise to buy this grain from the government so they can eat during this famine. But eventually the money system fails, and they have to do something else. Verse 15 of chapter 47. So when the money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us bread, for why should we die in your presence? For the money has failed." Then Joseph said, "Give your livestock, and I will give you bread for your livestock if the money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for the horses, the flocks, the cattle, and the herds, and for the donkeys. Thus he fed them in bread in exchange for all their livestock that year. Money fails. So Joseph says, okay, since you don't have any money, you give me your livestock, and I'll use that to trade you with grain. But eventually, guess what happens? The livestock runs out. So what are they going to do? Verse 18, when the year had ended, they came to him the next year and said to him, we will not hide from my lord that our money is gone. My lord also has our herds of livestock. There is nothing left in the sight of my lord but our bodies and our lands. So Joseph says, basically, it's okay, you're out of money, you're out of livestock, then sell me your land, and I'll give you back the grain. Continue on in verse 20. Eventually, obviously, the land runs out then. Then Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for every man of the Egyptians sold his field, because the famine was severe upon them. So the land became Pharaoh's. As for the people, he moved them into the cities, from one end of the borders of Egypt to the other land. Down to verse 23. Then Joseph said to the people, indeed, I have bought you and your land this day for Pharaoh. Look, here is seed for you, and you shall sow the land. And it came to pass at the harvest that you will give 1/5 to Pharaoh, 4/5 shall be your own as seed for the field, for your food, for those of your households, and as food for the little ones. So they said, you have saved our lives. Let us find favor in the sight of the Lord, and we will be the Pharaoh's servants. And Joseph made it a law over the land to this day that Pharaoh should have 1/5, except for the land of the priests only, which did not become Pharaoh's. So they're out of land, so he buys their land, brings them into the cities. But after this is over, after the famine is over, what does he do? He loans them back their land and gives them seed. So the people borrow from Joseph so they can go out and they can make farms and they can make a harvest. And he makes it a law that they're going to pay back the government from what they loaned. This is Joseph's system, and it ends up saving all these people. So credit in itself is not bad. And I know this kind of turns really into taxation when you look at the law and how it's going to be 1/5. But even that, when you take a loan out from the government and you're going to give it back, you need to pay back your loans, just like he did. And the credit in itself is not the bad guy. It's actually what you do with your credit, which is what distinguishes between you're doing right or wrong, being righteous or living a wicked life. So this is kind of, you see the good side of this. You want to need to make a profit, you need to survive. This would be the time to borrow, to make a profit, to survive. From here on out, let's talk about the reasons why we should not borrow. And these are the things that truly get us. The biggest and obvious one of these, and I guess a lot of y'all can actually guess what this is, what would be the biggest reason why you should not borrow? When you cannot pay it back. That should be the obvious reason. And it's something that's commanded several times in the Bible. Take out your Bibles again, turn to Romans 13, verse 8 here. In Romans, Paul here is actually talking about taxation originally. And he's saying, look, you have to pay your taxes. This is a position that God has set up. He's an avenger. He's actually supposed to protect you. You have to pay your taxes. Verse 7, he says, render to all those that are due, taxes who taxes are due, customs to customs, fear unto fear, honor unto honor. Then in verse 8, owe no one anything except to love one another. For he who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, you shall not covet. If there is any other commandment, all are summed up in this saying, namely, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfillment of the law. This is the law. And what's summed up in this law is to love your neighbor as yourself. So when you borrow something, whether it be from a bigwig CEO, whether it be from a big company, or whether it just be from your neighbor down the street, and you don't pay it back, or if you take out the loan, take out the borrow, and know you're not going to pay it back, that's absolutely a sin. It's awful. And if you think about it just in a very simple context again, if you borrow money, if you take money from somebody with the promise to give it back and you don't give it back, what at the heart of that is? That's stealing. That's stealing. Thou shalt not steal. And that's why Paul brings that up. Owe no one anything except love. Because thou shalt not steal enters in Love your neighbor as yourself. If I truly love my neighbor, I'm not going to steal from them, nor would I ever borrow from them with not the intention of ever paying back. That in itself would be sin. The Psalms give us some idea of this as well. In Psalm 37:27, he's actually talking about the way God views the wicked and God views the righteous. But it says the wicked borrows and does not repay, but the righteousness shows mercy and gives. That's the way that God views this. If you're a wicked, you're a borrower who does not repay. You're a thief. And that is wrong in so many levels, so many levels. If you could actually turn now to Ecclesiastes 5. Ecclesiastes, and now here, let's actually look at some of this. Ecclesiastes obviously is going to talk a lot about money. You have the preacher there, probably Solomon, who's explaining life, what it means to live. If he's going to explain life, what it means to live, he's going to have to talk about money. And he spends time talking about money in chapter 5. If you look in verse 4 of chapter 5 of Ecclesiastes, when you make a vow to God, do not delay to pay it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you have vowed. Better not to vow than to vow and not pay. And his main principle was actually making promises to God and not paying back. Not doing God what you told him you would do. But the application applies. How could you make a vow, make a promise, sign the paper, I'm going to pay this back, and then not pay it back? And just forget about it and just go away and don't worry about it. How could you do that? A Christian can't do that. A Christian is not a thief. Ye who steal no longer, but labor so that you may give, so that you may share. That's our fundamental principle. One of the fundamental principles of being a Christian. Why should I not borrow when you can't pay it back? And a lot of this goes into the rest of these ideas. I should not borrow when I'm just trying to fill the bottomless pit of greed. Again, all through Ecclesiastes, which is a common theme, is this idea of bottomless pits, vanity. And he's saying is you may try to fill yourself up. You're going to try to fill yourself with all these things, but they're never going to fill you up. And one of those things is money. In chapter 5, verse 10, he who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance. With increase, this is also is vanity. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. So what profit has the owners, except to see them with their own eyes? It is never going to fill you up. So the reason why usually sometimes when we take out loans, when we borrow, not for an emergency situation, but just from any other situation, a lot of time it is to fill us up. You see a boat and you want a boat. You see a PlayStation, in my case as a 7-year-old, and you want a PlayStation. You borrow so you can fill yourself up now. Now what's tricky about this, and what he says here, it never does fill you up. It never stops. And maybe this is when the credit card comes into play, right? That credit card is immediate. You swipe it, it's over. You swipe it, it's over. And there's sometimes now with these credit cards, you don't even have to put in a number or a zip code or anything like that, right? You can just tap and go. You can do things like that. When you have something that immediate that can fill you up that fast, it's easy to get caught away. It's easy to get drifted into that. And that's not what we can do. You have to exhibit some self-control and realize you're never going to fill it up. So before I borrow, let me think, am I trying to fill something up? Or am I just actually need something? Is this actually something that's going to be profitable, beneficial? Or is this just something I want because I'm greedy? You have to experience that as well and to think about that. Silver is never going to fill you up no matter how much you think it will. Continuing on, I have several of these. When should I not borrow? What about when you're just simply not being patient? Should you borrow then? No. Not again. I'm going to talk later about emergency situations. But it's not an emergency situation when you simply just want it now. And you can see this, and if you watch cable television, you know these slogans. It's your money, use it when you need it. It's my money, and I want it now. What is that appealing to? That's appealing to greed, and that's appealing to lack of self-control. And they're actually getting people this way. And that's why you see these payday places, there are more of those in Alabama than in McDonald's. It's because they actually are making a whole lot of profit of people that are being impatient in most cases. A city without walls. Proverbs 25:8. A city broken down with walls is one who lacks self-control. One that wants now is one who does not exhibit self-control. And as I said, he's a city without walls. He's defenseless. He has nothing. And if you do this, you can imagine the way Satan looks at you. And to kind of get into the next point, when you're just trying to keep a certain lifestyle, a lot of the times when we borrow, this becomes because we're spending too much on things we don't need. So maybe that's because we're greedy. Maybe that's for covetousness. Maybe that's the reason because we're trying to fill up this hole, but simply buying things over and over and over again and not realizing that we're actually borrowing money, paying things with money we don't have. Usually when we talk about this, we immediately want to single out women. Women, it's your fault because you're shopping and you're not stopping. That's not just true for women, is it? Men are just as guilty. I have never gone into Academy Sports without not buying anything. I go in there and I do it. We are all just as guilty of this, especially, again, when that credit card is so immediate and we don't think about what we're actually doing. What happens if we actually exhibit some self-control, control our city, say no to these things, self-denial, things that you don't need? What is that going to do? That's going to save you a whole lot of world of trouble. One thing I thought of, if you are in this situation where you are maybe trying to fill that hole, you're not being patient, you're trying to keep up a certain lifestyle, whatever it may be, do you realize that Satan watches you as you shop? Think about it. Satan would watch somebody while they shop, wouldn't he? You can imagine going up, watching me, following me around, and seeing me get things that I don't need. And maybe I'm coming in, checking out, and he's looking at my bag saying, why does Andrew need a disco ball? Things that have no purpose, things that it's really just because of his stuff. Stuff. Why does Andrew need these new Nikes? Why does Andrew need this? Why does Andrew need this? And what does Satan see when he sees someone that's not patient, that's trying to keep up a certain lifestyle, and ignoring the fact that they're borrowing money? He sees a person without walls. He sees someone who can't have self-control, that's not showing any self-control. And then from there on out, he's going to eat you alive because he knows where to hit you. He knows where to hit you, and that's what usually is your pocketbook. He knows where to get you there because, again, like I said, that's one of our main problems. It's what we struggle with. So don't be one of those people. Don't be a person that Satan follows in the shopping mall. Be one of those people that Satan just ignores because he knows you're not doing this sort of thing. You're not borrowing to try to keep up, being patient or a certain lifestyle. To continue on this idea of a certain lifestyle, and a lot of this goes into the applications we see in Ecclesiastes. Verse 12 of chapter 5, the sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. There is a severe evil which I have seen under the sun, riches kept from their owner to his hurt. But those riches perish through misfortune. When he begets a son, there is nothing to be in hand. As he came from his mother's womb, naked shall he return. To go as he came, and he shall take nothing from his labor, which he may carry away in his hand. Saying, if you came out here in this world with nothing, you're going to return there with nothing. So all this stuff, what you're trying to fill your hole up, this emptiness, you're not going to keep it. And this is why it keeps on saying the word vanity. It's all vanity. It's all just going to go away. It's like grasping after wind. It's going to be gone. Another reason why we end up in so much debt as a society, and it gets brought up a lot, is college loans. Right? We always talk about college loans, and there's debates about how the way we should handle that situation. The more I was thinking about this and trying to be in college myself and figure this out, why do we all go to college? Do we all need to go to college? Or are we trying to keep up a certain lifestyle? Because in the movies and the stuff we see, okay, this is what you do in life. You go to elementary school, you go to high school, and then you go to college and you have this college experience, and that's where you grow up. Do us, and talking to the young people here, do you want to go to college because it's an investment? You want to borrow money to invest so you can make and turn a profit to gain an education? Or do you want to go there for the experience? That's a good way to keep you in debt. And I have a lot of buddies that have a lot of useless degrees. Because they're not going to college to do something. They're trying to keep up a certain lifestyle. And that's what it's going to end up you is in a whole lot of debt. Because you're not going to be able to do. Trade schools are great. Go out and learn a skill. Go learn how to work. That's what Adam commanded to do when he leaves the garden, not to go get an education, but to go work. And this is what you see here, the man who labors, what is his sleep is? His sleep is sweet. The man here that's glorified is not the man that's educated, that's highly educated, but the man who works. His is sleep. But the rich man has all these things, and he keeps him up at night. And that's what he uses there. So let's not try to keep up a certain lifestyle, especially when we're going to be borrowing money. That doesn't make any sense. One last thing about this and moving on. The emergency situation. When you do have to take out and you have to borrow money because of a medical bill, something that we declare as an emergency, the famine. And I understand that. There's going to be a lot of times when we're going to have to do that. But a lot of times, because we're living up and we're keeping up this certain lifestyle, we don't develop savings because we're spending so much money on things that we don't need. And you have to examine your pocket, but you have to examine yourself and say, am I one of these people? Joseph saved up the grain in stores. He laid by it in store. All right, and in churches, local churches were commanded to lay by and store for emergency situations, for famine, that sort of thing. So if you're in a situation where you're spending so much things that you're balancing out, you don't have any savings, and you're constantly having to take out loans because of emergencies, you need to really evaluate. Maybe I don't need to be doing that. We don't always need the big cable package. We don't need the big data package for our cell phones. There's a lot of things, if you look through your budget, can go away so we can save up, so we can be like Joseph and be prepared those days of famine. There's a lot of things to think about here, but you can just have this as a main point, to keep up a certain lifestyle. That's not a reason to borrow money. What about if you have a heart problem? And I mean this because I'm about to read here at the end of this chapter, verse 18, Ecclesiastes 5. Here is what I've seen. It is good and fitting for one to eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor, in which he toils from under the sun all the days of his life, which God gives him, for it is his heritage. As for every man of whom God has given riches and wealth, and given him power to eat of it, to receive his heritage and rejoice in his labor, this is the gift of God. For he will not dwell unduly on the days of his life, because God keeps him busy with the joy of his heart. He explains here why we have to work. If you look here just at the end, don't read anything else. It's to keep us busy. It's to give us something to do while we're here on this earth. But it is a gift of God. It's a gift of God that you can labor and enjoy the fruits of your labor. You can rejoice in your labor, it says there in verse 19. So you work to get the rejoicement. You labor, and then you get the rejoicement. I was laughing the other day when my academic advisor looked at me and said, you're a full-time student and you're a full-time minister, something like that. She looked at me all confused. And it's kind of weird because we do full-time, that's what we call it. You take 12 hours in school, you're a full-time student. So I have to labor. It's hard to do that. And then I work here and I do stuff here, so I'm a full-time preacher. But I was realizing, I was thinking about full-time, it's going to be great when it's all over and I can enjoy the fruits of my labor. I'll be out of school and I'll be able just to focus on one thing. But a lot of y'all can tell me that full-time status in two different worlds, it doesn't stop, does it? You get done with school, you may have a full-time job, you're a full-time employee, but you may also be a full-time husband. That's two jobs right there, isn't there? You be a full-time employee, be a full-time wife. Some of us here are full-time employees, full-time husbands, and full-time dads. That's 3 jobs right there. Some of us are mothers that have 3 children. You're a full-time mom times 3. It never stops, does it? We're going to work until we die. You have that shocking realization. We're going to work until we die. But here we get to enjoy it. It's a gift from God because it is accomplishment. When you get done with a project, you would get done with a paper, you get done with something, and you enjoy it. It's awesome. It's great. And this is something he gives us. The problem is when we try to borrow because we try to skip the labor part. I want to enjoy the fruit without enjoying the labor. And it doesn't work like that. That's not the way it's described. What you do is you become that rich man that has all these possessions that can't sleep at night. Usually in crippling debt. And that's not the way that the preacher taught us. That's not the way that God taught us. The danger in not paying off debt. And if you haven't been encouraged to work on this or to at least think on this, self-evaluate this, hopefully this will help you to get along. This is not, and the title of this slide is not the danger of being in debt. Okay, probably if I look at that back at that chart, we all here are probably in debt. And if I said that to be in debt was wrong, I would be condemning a whole lot of people. I'd be condemning myself. And that wouldn't be biblical because we've gone through this. Debt is not bad. What this is the danger in not paying off debt. This is just not doing it, to refusing to do so. For one, the debtor who doesn't pay off his debt can hurt the name of Christ. Luke 16:7, this is the parable of the good steward, or the steward that judged shrewdly. It's a difficult parable, but thankfully Jesus explains what he means by it at the end. 16, verse 11. 16, verse 11, not verse 7, verse 11. Therefore, if you have been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, you will commit to trust in true riches. And if you have not been faithful in what is another man's, whom will give you what is his own? Saying, hey, if you can be faithful and exhibit control with money, then you also should be able to control what I'm going to give you, which is something so much more. Now, the other way around, you can't control money. What can you control? And outsiders will look at you like that. If you can't control your money, how can you possibly control your soul? It'd be very hard, and you could hurt the name of Christ. One who doesn't pay off his debt, one who's not working to pay off his debt, that debtor cannot share. Ephesians 4:28, we already talked about it. He who steals, let him steal no longer, but labor so that he can share. You are commanded to share. But if you're in so much debt and you're not working to get rid of that, you're not sharing anything. You have nothing to share, even though you're commanded to do so. So you can put yourself in a bad situation where you're going to have to be trying to do commandments that you can't keep. There's another one. The debtor cannot lay by and store. The one who's not trying to pay off his debts. You have a commandment here to do the work of the Lord here, to lay by and store on the first day of the week as you have prospered. If you're not prospering because you've been irresponsible with your money, you're not meeting this commandment either. And the church as a whole is going to be hurt by that, because you could be providing something that you're not providing in this situation. Also, one final one, the Christian debtor can become a burden to the church. Can't he? He can. Someone who's so irresponsible, someone who's not willing to work, someone who's not willing to try to get off their debt or to put themselves willfully in debt, can become a burden to the church. 1 Timothy 5:16 explains those who have given the money we can give to widows who meet certain qualifications, and that we have the authority to do that. We also have the authority to give to needy saints, and we should. And if you're in trouble and you're going through a famine, there's something wrong and you feel like we can be of help, you need to say something if you're a member here. Okay, we have the authority to do that. Now look at from this other principle, if you have willfully put yourself in this situation, could you burden the church? Well, here he says women who aren't really widows, sweet old ladies, can burden the church. And if a sweet old lady can burden the church, what else can? A whole lot of things. A whole lot of things. You can become a burden to those around you. Or you can work your way out of it. Now again, I'm not saying not to ask for help. I'm saying to don't put yourself in this situation where you have to, if it can be helped. Because again, it's not a sin to be in debt, but it's a sin to not try to pay off your debts. And that's what's taught about in Ecclesiastes. Appreciate your close attention. Mr. Chuck said, after seeing my PowerPoint, that I would be chased out of this room with pitchforks. But I don't think I'm going to be chased out of this room with pitchforks. I encourage you, if you are not in debt, to make sure to be wise and use godly principles to control your money and yourself. If you're already in the situation where you're working the world of credit and the world of the economy, I encourage you to continue to be responsible and to pay what you owe so that you can bring glory and praise to Christ as being someone who knows how to be responsible, someone who's a city with walls. To completely change gears here, what's great about grace is that it's a gift. It's not a loan at all. It's not anything that you're expected to pay back. And of course, you're expected to do your reasonable service after you receive grace, but it is a gift. There's no money value that's put onto it. There's no interest. There's nothing like that. It is a gift. and it is freely given. And even though it was a gift and it was freely given, it was still given at a cost. If you are ready to accept that free gift, if you are ready, we want you to do that tonight. If you're someone who's fallen away, who needs to study, who wants to repent publicly, whatever